Okay, so N Corp Sinclair, let's talk about him. Now, the femboy recently got an identity in which he turned racist, became ungay, and the result is one of the strongest units in the game currently. And because of this, some people have been worried about power creep. So I thought I'd give my thoughts on Sinclair power creep in Limbus Company, and later I'm gonna talk about how power creep is in most gacha games. So right now he is one of the best damage dealers. His S3 can roll 33 times in a row and doesn't cost him any resources such as charge or ammo. However, to consistently roll high on him, you need to invoke my favorite tag, Mind Break. All of his skills make him lose his mind, and he doesn't gain as much sanity in a clash compared to the other identities. And that's meant to be what balances him, managing being next to negative 45 sanity and making it so he is never once happy on the battlefield. Now, the consequence for fucking up is having him distort, thus turning one of the party members into a fine paste, which, depending on the situation, can either be hilariously ineffective to where you really only lost one turn with him, or he can destroy your entire run. But here's what I think of him. He isn't really overpowered, and in the future will more than likely become weaker. Now, why do I say that? Well, as of now, him distorting more than likely isn't terrible. You usually won't get deleted, but I have one word that will make you fear using him. Aleph. In the future, when we get Aleph egos, him distorting will change from a cute femboy with an oversized pizza cutter into the fucking 7th Umbral Calamity. At one point you'll be having a good time, the next you will witness cities burning, allies resigning, Virgilia sighing, and in the back we'll have Sinclair laughing at us. In the future, balancing his sanity won't be some haha fun moment, it will be a motherfucking ticking time bomb of pure fear and despair. Which is why I think he'll be balanced, because I'd imagine you would want to use Aleph Ego, and the consequence for distorting it will probably be huge, which makes units that teeter on the edge of insanity actually scary to deal with. I mean shit, Ebony Stem can already delete you, and that shit's he level only. So whilst tail-based units have an easier time in clashes and can deal out more damage, assuming their numbers will be close to Sinclair's, when we get Ego that will be a huge boon to different builds and will probably be meta-defining, I'd bet that they will ruin a fight on distortion. Or maybe Sinclair could use that to his benefit on solo runs, just constantly distort and turn him into an Aleph every other turn. But I think Project Moon will make future fights in a way to where soloing isn't the best choice due to the mechanics in them, or make strong identities to where going solo would actively hurt you, as 5 strong units with synergy is better than 1 depressed twink. But end of the day, I can't say anything with full certainty. After all, only time will tell, but I don't think N Corp Sinclair represents insane power creep. And Limbus has a lot of ways to avoid power creep. For example, Pierre Ryoshu does more damage and, in my opinion, has better passives than Kurokuma Ryoshu. But if you need Gluttony or Pride, Paralysis, Bleed count increases, or the ability to nerf the enemy's rolls and damage, Kurokuma is better to go for. Since the units in Limbus have many different moving parts to them, it would be hard to make a one-to-one power creep, as more than likely there will be at least one difference between the units. Honestly, the biggest problem that will show with time is the fact that we only have 12 characters, so in the future there will be more of the Dawn situation, which is where people are like, oh, N Corp Dawn seems interesting, too bad she don't got the ability to rip space and ignore mechanics. But I do want to clarify that I don't think having 12 main characters is a mistake. After all, I do quite like it as it means more development for the characters you'll be using in the game. As many gachas have leagues of characters, so much to where equally developing each character would take too much time. So having a limited cast means we'll get more development for the characters we'll use in gameplay. Unlike how in some games there's a character who's godlike and we're yet to get any meaningful development for them in the past 2 years. Yes, I'm fucking salty. Overall though, with time I think we'll start to see the weakness of N Sinclair, and Limbus has many different ways to avoid power creep due to the myriad of differences with the identities. But that aside, here's a cold hard truth. Gachas need a degree of power creep. Now don't get it twisted, power creep can be done in an acceptable way, like how Arknights does it. For some characters, that is. Now it's most preferable for gachas to make side grade characters. Like in Arknights there's Fiametta and W, Exia and Ash, and this may be controversial, but Aethial and Kaobe. These units are, in my opinion, good side grades as they fulfill a similar role but operate differently enough to where one doesn't make the other worthless. However, in Arknights there is more and more power creep being shown off, and if you've never played the game, don't worry, this is going to be easy to see. So, here's Phantom, a fast redeploy released about 2 years ago. Here's Texas Alter, another fast redeploy who was yet to be released on Global. Yeah, the difference is very apparent. You could argue that Phantom has more utility, but no, the gap between the two is too wide. They don't do the same shit exactly, but one is on the peak of Everest and the other is at the bottom of the Mariana Trench looking in a mirror. And Silver Ash from Linar is another example of power creep. Hell, let's not even talk about how Schwartz was fucking assassinated either. However, for the sake of sales, a bit of power creep is needed. After all, I have about 93% of the characters in the game. The only reason I have to roll is because I like the characters or their gameplay. But even if I like their gameplay or character, since there's a limited number of units you can bring into a stage, eventually I'll have a team filled with my favorites. Even though you could bring in 12 characters, which is a huge number. So because of that, some gameplay edge is needed for me to roll. But if it gets to the point where I know a unit I'm rolling for will be useless 6 months from now, why should I roll? That would actively make me not want to spend money, as I know it will become worthless very quickly, which is why power creep needs to be properly managed. Overall, to get people to roll, new units could either be good side grades, have fun gameplay, be well written characters, have massive fucking titties, or be stronger than prior units. And for some players, having a unit that is strong will be the sole reason they'll roll. Due to that, and the steady increase in difficulty you can see in live service games, power creep is bound to happen, but it must be managed or players will be angry, like how people were with Kingdom Hearts Unicross, a game with insane power creep to the point where you can never feel fully confident in a unit's capabilities for the long term. But even with power creep being something that happens naturally, there are good ways to mitigate it. Like how Arknights has a module system. In case you have zero clue what that is, it's a system in which you use resources to upgrade the talents of a character, and it's been used to buff up older and weaker units. One of the biggest examples would be Praminix. Once you release, the cold status didn't exist in the game. So for her module, they made it so she can inflict cold as it made sense for the lore behind the character. Chen had a huge problem with generating skill points when she couldn't attack an enemy. So they made a module that addressed that weakness and made her a much better unit. They also took a character who many deemed to be one of the worst and made her fucking unkillable with modules. They're a good way to make power crept units viable again. Honestly, they can make it so Silver Ash's leader talent gets buffed by a module and now you have a reason to use him over Mlinar. But Mlinar was still very lazy, in all honesty. The reason I brought up modules though is to say that although power creep in gacha games is necessary, there are ways to fix it. But too much creep means you got a game that belongs in a church for their true calling of being a priest. In other words, that shit is bad. But absolute lack of it is A, rare to see, and B, can cause some players to have no reason to roll, thus making it so the revenue is bad. But power creep can happen just by the mechanics of the game evolving with time, which is perfectly normal to see. I can imagine something like that happening in Limbus. Let's say some new units in Chapter 5 come out and have smoke, and turns out smoke is really good. All of a sudden, units that rely on poise are even less desirable because poise isn't all that good and smoke is just that much better. However, they could make a system to combat natural power creep, like modules. Let's take Blade Lineage Ji-Song for example. With them, they can make it so he generates much more poise through his passive, thus making crit hits for him common so he can deal actual damage as opposed to the fucking wet noodle he has for a mistake of a blade right now. Deadass, the book he hits a bitch with does more damage. Or they could just buff poise, which they probably will because holy shit, it's fucking struggling. Now, I'm not saying they need to introduce modules or something like that, but I am saying natural power creep will happen, and when that occurs, seeing a way to combat it would be nice. But as of now, I can't say there's that much power creep, as N Corp Sinclair will likely fall off when we get stronger egos, but of course that's just my prediction. I don't fully know if that'll be the case. And I'm not worried about him being terribly overpowered as of now because honestly the content we got in the game currently is pretty fucking easy. But that's my thoughts on N Corp Sinclair and power creep in general. Now let's get out there and gaslight people into thinking that finding femboys hot makes you straight. When the task force is when